Hello everyone, welcome to From the Star Wars Library, where Star Wars is in print, the Force is with the readers, and the lighting just sucks. I am your host, Nathan P. Butler. This is episode 1 of From the Star Wars Library, or at least the novel line of From the Star Wars Library's episode 1. We will be doing a separate line for Star Wars comics in the very near future. And this time, as it is appropriate, first episode, we are taking a look at the first Star Wars novel ever. The whole idea of this series is to go through them in publication order, going into notable things about them, their authors, and so forth. What better place to start if we're talking publication order than in the beginning? And when I say the beginning, we're not talking May 25th, 1977, the day that A New Hope appeared in theaters without the subtitle. That movie was basically spoiled months in advance, but it didn't really become a huge thing, of course, until the movie came around. In December of 1976, 6 months earlier, Star Wars fans, or those who would become Star Wars fans, got their first glimpse into the universe with Star Wars, From the Adventures of Luke Skywalker, written by George Lucas. Only, not so much in the whole George Lucas thing. The story of the film, of course, is by George Lucas, and it was that outline that was used to write this book. But it's a book written by Alan Dean Foster. Now, Alan Dean Foster is an unusual guy in terms of Star Wars publications. He hasn't written a lot for Star Wars, but when he has, it's been in some oddball kinds of circumstances. For instance, the first time, it's the novelization of A New Hope here. The first novel, the first novelization, and one of the few things ever produced for Star Wars to be ghost-written. In this case, ghost-written under the name of George Lucas when it was actually just his overall story. Alan Dean Foster wrote the book. His second book winds up being the first real EU novel that we get for Del Rey, called Splinter of the Mind's Eye, that was sort of a low-budget sequel concept if the movie hadn't produced quite as much revenue as it actually wound up doing. Now, you skip ahead all the way up to 2002, and they're releasing Episode 2, Attack of the Clones. And for each of the Star Wars prequels, there was a lead-up novel, or a couple of lead-up novels, depending on which movie we're talking about here, to get people interested in it and to tie into something being referenced in the movie itself. In this case, there was a reference to a border dispute on Ension. He wound up developing that into a novel entitled The Approaching Storm, the tie-in lead-in novel for Attack of the Clones, many, many years later, though again with Del Rey. He never wrote for Bantam, the Star Wars licensee that had the license starting in 1991 up through right around the time that Del Rey got it and then launched off the New Jedi Order. So he is unusual also in the sense that he only wrote for Del Rey, while most of the authors have written for multiple if they've been writing for many years of Star Wars. I apologize if you're hearing the cat whining in the background. I'm sure the cat's probably a Star Trek fan, but I don't care. So, what we have here is an unusual book. Released before the film was even finished. What that means is that this book has some odd differences between itself and the film. Now, what I'm showing you here, this is the first edition paperback. Del Rey's original Star Wars novels, when they still had the license the first time around, were not released in hardback the first time. A lot of people think that they were, because you can find hardbacks out there, like this one, but they weren't. Originally, it was paperbacks. Okay, so this is the original version of it. If you were going to get a hardback of it at the time, back in '76, it was going to be in this form. This is, again, Star Wars From the Adventures of Luke Skywalker, George Lucas credited. This is the Sci-Fi Book Club version of it. It is a hardback. It's got some pictures in it from the film itself. My copy, again, David Noche, who gave us the idea to start this series in the first place, suggested as a way to highlight my collection, along with talking about the books. So one thing in my collection, this particular first edition hardback from the book club is signed by Anthony Forrest, who played Fixer in the cut scenes and played the move along stormtrooper in Mos Eisley. So you could have it like this. Some folks have gotten it much later in other publications. Del Rey reprinted it at one point as a fairly common edition here, the special omnibus edition that has the original Star Wars novelization, again, by Alan Dean Foster, says it's written by George Lucas, plus The Empire Strikes Back by Donald F. Glut and Return of the Jedi by James Caan. In this case, my copy here, I took with me when I had the chance to interview Alan Dean Foster for Chrono Radio, one of my podcasts years ago, and he happened to sign this particular edition of it. So I still have it, even though for the most part I've ditched omnibus versions for individual publications. This, again, like I said, it's a weird book to read because, for the most part, it follows the storyline of the film, but there are oddball things that are different. Like, for instance, when you're reading, not watching the Battle of Yavin, all of a sudden Luke's squadron isn't Red Squadron, it's Blue Squadron. Some of the other characters that are described in different ways. C-3PO is described as bronze instead of gold. Jabba the Hutt is described as being more humanoid in appearance than what the slug-like Hutt we wind up finding him as in Return of the Jedi, and the special edition now of A New Hope. We have oddball things like little name changes. You have the number change on the trash compactor. They take TK421, right? TK421, why aren't you at your post? And yes, I'm looking at a couple of notes here. TK421, why aren't you at your post? Is actually THX 1138 in the novel, a reference to the film by George Lucas that's referenced over and over and over in every single Star Wars video version ever. Like the Clone Wars having THX all over the place. It's an odd one, but what's really kind of neat about it is it was the one place prior to the release of the Blu-rays, or the Behind the Magic CD-ROM ages ago, if anybody even remembers that thing, where we had a chance to see some of these scenes that were actually cut, scripted but cut after being filmed, like Luke showing up in Tashi Station and running into Biggs before they wind up running into each other again on Yavin 4. That sort of poignant thing that makes Biggs' death actually mean something other than in the original cut of A New Hope being like, why is Luke caring if this guy died? He's really not somebody we knew much of. Maybe we care about him because Luke does, but we don't care about him for ourselves, not yet. If you read the original novelization, you would have cared about him at the time. There's even an extra line for Luke, referencing back to the whole shooting stars that'll never be stopped, as he sort of is shedding a tear. His eyes are watering over the loss of Biggs during the Battle of Yavin. So maybe not necessarily one to read, unless you're looking for the differences, but one to collect because it is where it all started. This is where Del Rey first got into Star Wars. A publisher took a chance on George Lucas, just like 20th Century Fox did, and ta-da! We wind up with the Star Wars saga, not just on film, but also in print form here. If you'll permit me, a brief reading of the prologue that excited a lot of people because it was a hint about what we would see eventually in the prequels, although you will notice some subtle differences in this concept versus what finally appeared when Lucas made the films. It starts out not with a long time ago in a galaxy far, far away, but another galaxy, another time. The Old Republic was the Republic of legend, greater than distance or time. No need to note where it was or whence it came, only to know that it was the Republic. Once, under the wise rule of the Senate and the protection of the Jedi Knights, the Republic throve and grew. But, as often happens when wealth and power pass beyond the admirable and attain the awesome, then appear those evil ones who have greed to match. So it was with the Republic at its height. Like the greatest of trees, able to withstand any external attack, the Republic rotted from within, though the danger was not visible from the outside. Aided and abetted by restless, power-hungry individuals within the government and the massive organs of commerce, the ambitious Senator Palpatine caused himself to be elected President of the Republic. Note, President there, not Supreme Chancellor. He promised to reunite the disaffected among the people and to restore the remembered glory of the Republic. Once secure in office, he declared himself Emperor, shutting himself away from the populace. Soon he was controlled by the very assistants and bootlickers he had appointed to high office, and the cries of the people for justice did not reach his ears. Interesting bit there. Palpatine is being controlled by his advisors and corporate interests, not him truly being the emperor that we know him to be in the later EU and, of course, the films. Having exterminated through treachery and deception the Jedi Knights, guardians of justice in the galaxy, the Imperial governors and bureaucrats prepared to institute a reign of terror among the disheartened worlds of the galaxy. Many used the Imperial forces and the name of the increasingly isolated Emperor to further their own personal ambitions. But a small number of systems rebelled at these new outrages. Declaring themselves opposed to the new order, they began the great battle to restore the old Republic. From the beginning, They were vastly outnumbered by the systems held in thrall by the Emperor. In those first dark days, it seemed certain the bright flame of resistance would be extinguished before it could cast the light of new truth across a galaxy of oppressed and beaten peoples. That is credited to, from the first saga, Journal of the Wills, which of course is one of those mysterious references that so far we haven't gotten a lot of detail about from George Lucas, just little hints here and there. It is followed by another quote, much shorter, but honestly just as poignant and just as interesting for those who are going to be reading this, although after that quote you could pretty much stop and just watch the movie. The quote is from Leia Organa of Alderaan, Senator. She says, "They were in the wrong place at the wrong time. Naturally, they became heroes." What better phrase could there be to describe the heroes of the Star Wars galaxy? Alright, so now we're at the end of the episode. We've checked out the A New Hope novelization by Alan Dean Foster, and the question now is, what's the ranking? We're not going to do a scale of 1 to 10 or scale of 1 to 5 or how many stars kind of ranking here. We want something a little more user-friendly. Anytime we deal with any of these books, we'll note whether it is an essential read, something that needs to be read because it's either that good, that impactful, or that essential to understand other stuff, or we'll note if something is just a good read, but not essential. We will also then note if a book can or should be skipped in this case. So, this particular book, Star Wars From the Adventures of Luke Skywalker by Alan Dean Foster, credited to George Lucas. Is it an essential read? No. If you've seen the film, you don't need to read this at all. Is it a good read, even if it's not essential? Yeah. It's kind of interesting to see the different things that are jarring because they are so different from the film, but beyond that, nothing special. Can you skip it if you've seen the film? Absolutely. Should you skip it? If things that are jarring bother you, yes. If not, it's an interesting curiosity. With that, we will wrap up this episode of From the Star Wars Library, as you can see behind me here. As always, we will end by saying, thank you for watching, and may the Force be with the readers.